Take a good, long look at this cover. No, I swear to you, it is not someone's secret fan art compilation. This is indeed an official issue of the comic. And it's a pretty good issue, too. And for once, the cover actually has a lot to do with what's inside. The story is the first to really start to build some serious continuity within the comic, calling back to an admittedly terrible issue, but makes it a little bit better, and introduces us to elements that are going to be very important down the line. The story begins with a familiar portal opening and depositing a half-robot, half-animal version of Sonic from a parallel world. He explains that in his dimension, the Freedom Fighters have all been half-roboticized, and in desperation, their Robotnik subjected himself to the process. To quote Cybersonic, "Robotnik was pure evil before, but what he's become since is infinitely worse." Now it turns out that he's decided one universe isn't enough and is planning to invade other universes, starting with this one. So, Sonic and friends gather up as many Sonics from different universes as possible to fight off this new threat. Even telling the Sonics of an extra-dimensional weapon known as the Titan's Hand, and sends them off to get it. Of course, he just wants them to find the hand so that he can turn it on them. So the Sonics head onto the multiverse highway to find the weapon while Robo-Robotnik decides to try fighting fire with fire, summoning the only Sonic that was not called to help the others. Evil Sonic. This leads to him confronting Sonic Prime, and Robo-Robotnik getting his hands on the last piece he needs to complete the Titan's Hand. Of course, Sonic and friends defeat the threat, break up the weapon, and spread the pieces all throughout the multiverse to keep it from ever falling into the wrong hands again. This issue is really good. Obviously, it isn't nearly as serious as the special that came before it, but it manages to find a good balance between its cartoonish nature without getting so cartoony that it flies in the face of the relatively believable story that we have before us. Believable for a comic, anyway. The story is very well told and well paced, and as I said before, it does a good job of calling back to and giving more relevance to some ideas that were introduced in a one-off story that probably wasn't planned to have any significance later down the line. Evil Sonic even got something to do in this issue. All he really did was fail and set himself up as one of the most comically ineffective villains in the comics' history, but it's better than him just standing there and playing the exposition fairy for us. Its use of foreshadowing is also pretty nice as well. We're shown early on in the story how several small Sonics are able to take down the incredible Son by working together and using his large size against him. This is called back to later in the issue when Robo-Robotnik uses the Titan's Hand, and all of the Sonics do a collective spin dash on him to defeat him when he's off balance. Seeing the way that the two Robotniks play off of each other is a bit of a wasted opportunity. I feel as though they don't really have a whole lot of banter together. Hell, there isn't really a whole lot of banter between Robotnik and the Sonics, come to think of it. A lot of the dialogue can be kind of plain in its effort to try and move the plot forward, but the banter between all of the different Sonics actually does manage to be a little entertaining. Something to be said for the clash of egos, after all. Though, really, the only alternate Sonics that get a chance to shine are Muscled Sonic, Evil Sonic, and Cyber Sonic. I'm starting to wonder how many times I've written Sonic into this script because it's getting a bit repetitive, Sonic. Speaking of all the multidimensional Sonics, that is a highlight of the issue. You can tell that Dave Manek and Rich Kowalski were having a ball filling all of the massive group shots with as many different references and creative interpretations as they could. They're all pretty well detailed, too. The artwork's taken a small step back in terms of detail, but a huge step forward in keeping the detail the characters have. It's cartoonish without being overly exaggerated, which I feel fits this sort of tone that the comic's in right now. No one goes off-model in a terribly noticeable way, and while it lacks a massive amount of detail that the Princess Sally story had, it also has the trade-off of looking much less stiff and more free and flowing, which I feel fits the universe very well. One of the downsides, though, is that its more kid-comic nature comes through with things like this. "Hey kids, can you count all of the Sonics on the page?" Or, perhaps one of my most hated aspects of kids' comics, cutting out things on the page. I hate the idea of destroying comics, but it does just make you realize what sort of climate the comic industry was in at the time. Even during the time this comic was published, comics as a whole, particularly those that were still considered mainstream and kid-friendly, were still seen as largely disposable. Hell, most comics were still being printed on newsprint, which isn't exactly known for its durability or longevity. You read it a couple of times and then it gets thrown out or falls apart, like pulp magazines or newspapers. This is a good step forward for the series that finds a happy medium between the more serious tone we saw in Sally's story and the more lighthearted and cartoony humor that the comic has from its earliest issues. It has a good use of foreshadowing and brings back established ideas from the comic's short history, expanding upon them and laying more groundwork for some stories that would come later down the line. Definitely an enjoyable read. Not all the reviews will be this short in the new format, by the way, but until we start covering more than one issue at once, I'll be churning these out a bit faster. I'm sure everyone who doesn't watch these videos are very happy about that. Issue 20 is coming up next, and oh boy, my Silver Age senses are tingling. That sounds like the absolute worst superpower ever, doesn't it? Well, see you next time, everybody.